one thing that we get frustrated by is how emerging markets in financial markets just get lumped together. And like the idea that Taiwan, India, China, Brazil, they're not all the same. They're completely different. So tell us where India is unique, how it's different to some of these other emerging markets, both in some of the choices they made that you were mentioning earlier, and then some of those other factors like demographics.
Now, that's a great question, because people often say, why is India expensive relative to the other emerging markets? So, Brazil, for example, heavily laden with resources companies, so iron ore, oil. So the index is more cyclical because the companies in it are, the heavyweights are cyclical. Taiwan is essentially one stock.
But what a stock it is.
It is. Phenomenal stock. Are you investing in Taiwan, or is it IT or technology?
Yeah.
Even that will have cycles. So Korea, manufacturing. India doesn't have one industry that's driven it. The largest weight in the index is about 25% when you look at the MSCI India, and that's in financials, but it doesn't have a cyclical industry that's driven it. So earnings growth have been extremely low in their volatility. One stat which is amazing is when I look at the earnings every year in India of the index, and I compare it to the S&P 500 or the ASX 200, India's volatility is amazingly low. It's only 15%. In the US and Australia, it's over 50%.
Wow.
India has not had a recession in earnings, 2008, 2020. So that means, you get this consistent compounding, but investors think, it's volatile, but the data doesn't show that.
Wow.
Yeah. So interesting to note. Yeah.
Love that. How do you respond to investors and advisors who sort of bucket it with a lot of the other emerging markets and talk about, currency risk, regulation, those sorts of, more common risks that come with emerging markets?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is fear of the unknown, to be honest. 25 countries in a basket called emerging markets feels safer than one country. I always discuss this saying, well, isn't it easier actually to forecast what one country looks like rather than a mix of 25? Because in anything where you've got more, there'll be some good and some bad. So I think the demographics are pretty clear in India. People ask me, what about the government regulatory issues? When I look at that, I say, I think the driving force, regardless of who's been in government, has actually been the size of the population and the age of the population. So that's not going away anytime soon. So I think, it's hard to find that unique type of demographics, and history shows us when countries experience it, they go through a growth phase. The one benefit for India is its equity market has allowed us to capture that. Whereas in China, perhaps growth has happened, but you haven't had equity growth.
Love that.
So the fund that you run, India Avenue, is based here in Australia, but you have a network of people and connections on the ground in India. You were mentioning before that you actually take groups of advisors over to India every year, where you said maybe you should take a group of podcasters one year, but we'll chat about that offline. So I guess we want to get some on-the-ground insights from you, like what's actually happening over there, and then perhaps how that compares to some of the perceptions you hear from investors and advisors in Australia. So what are some of the key trends that you're seeing when you've got boots on the ground over there?
Yeah, look, consumption patterns. When you're over there, you can see that, we assume when we live in the West, everyone's got a fridge, everyone's got a microwave, everyone owns Nike Jordans or, the best shoes. But in reality, aspiration looks very different in different countries because you're coming from a different base. I find generally Australians have a different mindset because most of us are above the poverty line. But when you're in a country where essentially you need to work to live and survive, your mindset and your thinking is very different. So that you notice that when you're there. The culture is very much everyone wants to work, everyone wants to progress. You also notice a government which is, in the last 10 years anyway, specifically been very pro-infrastructure, pro-growth, pro-employment, which is the need of the hour. at the end of the day, you can have a demographic dividend, but if people aren't working, there's no dividend. So employment and skilling is critical. And I think, infrastructure is amazing. When Australian advisors go over there, they can see road building, bridge building, cranes in the sky, progress that's happening. That resonates significantly because it's just the sheer volume of everything. When you meet with the IT firms and see, perhaps how they're dealing with cybersecurity, or when we went to the exchange this year, just seeing how the exchange is dealing with sheer volume of trades, because India is the 4th largest equity market in the world. So all those things, you have to see it with your own eyes, not just read about it or be told it.